Imagine a world where the sun rises every morning and gives you nothing. No warmth, no mercy, just a pale white disk hanging over a frozen wasteland. The ground beneath your feet is iron. The air itself has teeth, and somewhere behind you, the fire that kept your entire tribe alive last night has burned down to ash. For you, winter is an inconvenience, a reason to grab a thicker jacket. For your ancestors, winter was an executioner, and it never showed up alone. It came wrapped in 4 different forms of death at once: the cold that could stop your heart, the hunger that could hollow you out from the inside, the darkness that could break your mind long before it broke your body, and a silence so absolute that some tribes were forced into a choice no one should ever have to make. Today, we are not telling you the comfortable version of this story. We are going into the coldest, darkest corners of human survival, the methods our ancestors used when there was no other option left. Some of these methods will unsettle you. Some of them explain exactly why you are alive today. Stay until the end, because the last chapter of this story is the one almost nobody knows. Before we step into the frozen dark, ask yourself something. Do you actually know what it took for your bloodline to survive 10,000 winters in a row, with no heating, no stored food from a supermarket, and no guarantee of seeing the next sunrise? Half Evolved exists to dig up exactly these buried truths, the raw, unfiltered history of how we became the last human species standing. If stories like this pull something out of you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we are only getting started. And the next chapter goes even deeper into the dark. Long before anyone thought about digging a hole in frozen ground, ancient hunters had already run into the brutal math of an Ice Age winter. In warmer months, a successful hunt fed the group for days. But once the snow buried the plains and the herds scattered or vanished entirely, a single kill had to somehow last for weeks, sometimes months. There was no easy way to keep meat from spoiling once the group settled in for the season. So they turned to the one force powerful enough to fight decay, the same force trying to kill them, the cold. Thus itself, groups living near the Arctic Circle learned to dig storage pits straight down into the permafrost, the layer of ground that never fully thaws. A fresh kill would be lowered into that pit and sealed beneath stone, hide, or packed snow. Down there, temperatures stayed low enough to slow bacteria to a crawl, but not low enough to stop it completely. Months later, when that meat was finally pulled back out, it was not the meat they had buried. It had changed color. It had changed texture. It had, in the plainest sense, begun to rot slowly into something closer to a soft, fermented paste. Anthropologists studying Arctic communities have documented this practice for generations. It even has a name among some northern peoples: high meat. It reeked of decay. It looked wrong. And they ate it anyway, because that fermented, foul-smelling meat was often the only source of vitamin C available for hundreds of miles in the dead of winter. And without it, an entire group could be wiped out by scurvy long before the cold ever touched them. What looked like spoiled food was, in truth, a survival technology, refined over countless winters until an entire community understood exactly how long to bury it, and exactly how much they could stomach before it stopped being medicine and started being poison. With food buried in the frozen ground, the next war was against the cold itself. Stop. And out on the open tundra, that war was almost impossible to win with fire alone, because fire needs fuel. And on a landscape scraped bare by ice, there were no forests to cut down. There was, however, something else in massive supply: the remains of the giants that once ruled that frozen world. At a site called Meseric, In what is now Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered something almost impossible to picture: entire dwellings, constructed from the bones of dozens of mammoths. Jaw bones stacked like shingles along the walls. Long curved tusks arched together to frame the entrances. Skulls used as foundation stones. These were not quick, disposable shelters thrown together in a panic. They were engineered structures, built with real planning, meant to survive an entire brutal season, homes made from the skeletons of animals that had themselves lost the fight against that same winter. Stop. Living inside a structure built from the dead was simply what survival demanded when there was nothing else left to build with. But bone shelters had gaps everywhere, and every gap was an open invitation for the wind. So people packed those seams with hide, turf, and snow, turning a skeleton into something closer to a sealed chamber. And in the most desperate moments, when a blizzard hit before a proper shelter could be built, hunters did something that sounds almost impossible today. They cut open the still warm carcass of a freshly killed animal, hollowed it out, and climbed inside. It sounds brutal because it was brutal, but a dying animal's body held heat for hours after the kill, and for a hunter caught far from camp with a storm closing in, that grim, bloody cocoon was sometimes the only thing standing between them and freezing to death before morning. Now picture the darkest turn this story takes. Sealed inside a shelter, meat rationed out, gram by gram, and still the season refuses to end. The stored food runs out before the thaw arrives. Every plant nearby is dead. Every animal has either migrated or is starving just as badly as the humans hunting it. And when every other option is exhausted, the archaeological record shows us something almost too heavy to say out loud. At sites, including Grandolina in Spain and Gough's Cave in England, researchers examining ancient bones found cut marks that told an unmistakable story. These were not ritual markings. They matched, almost exactly, the same butchering technique used on deer and other game, the same defleshing cuts, the same targeting of major muscle groups, the same cracking open of long bones to reach the marrow inside, the single most calorie-dense part of the entire body. This was not myth or exaggeration. This was survival cannibalism. Cold, calculated, and driven by nothing more complicated than the raw arithmetic of staying alive one more week. It is uncomfortable to sit with, but it is also part of the honest history of our species, a reminder of exactly how far the human body and mind will go when extinction is the only alternative. There was a strange logic to how these choices layered on top of each other. A group that had mastered the frozen pit and the bone hut still had to move, still had to step outside into air that could kill an exposed hand in minutes, and every trip out for more fuel or another buried cache was itself a small gamble against the cold. So decisions were never made lightly. Elders who remembered the last brutal winter guided when to dig, when to move, when to ration harder, and when the group had to consider options nobody wanted to speak of out loud. That knowledge, carried from one dark season to the next, was as much a survival tool as any spear or fire pit. And then there is a theory that sounds almost like science fiction, except it comes from real fossil evidence. At the Cima de los Huesos site in Spain, researchers studying the bones of an early human relative, Homo heidelbergensis, noticed something strange. Seasonal patterns of bone damage that closely resemble the kind of stress marks found in animals that hibernate. Some scientists now believe certain early human populations may have entered a state of extreme metabolic slowdown during the harshest stretches of winter, something short of true hibernation, but a kind of torpor, drastically reduced movement, minimal eating, huddled together for warmth, conserving every possible calorie by barely existing at all. Picture it. Weeks of near total stillness in the freezing dark, listening to the breathing of the people beside you. Unsure if everyone in that shelter would still be breathing when the light finally returned. Whether it was full hibernation or something close to it, the underlying strategy was the same. Stop. When you cannot outrun winter, and you cannot out-hunt it, sometimes the only move left is to slow your entire body down until it passes. Every single one of these methods, the fermented meat pulled from frozen ground, the homes built from the bones of the dead, the desperate warmth stolen from a fresh carcass, the impossible choice made when there was nothing left to eat, the slow, deliberate stillness of near hibernation. None of it was cruelty for its own sake. It was engineering under the worst possible conditions, forged by people who refused to simply lie down and disappear. We are not descended from the ones who gave up when winter closed in. We are descended from the ones who found one more way to survive it, no matter how dark that way had to be. So the next time you feel a chill walking from your front door to your car, remember what that same season used to cost. Remember the frozen pits, the mammoth bone walls, the silence of a shelter waiting out a storm that might not end in time. Somewhere in your DNA is the memory of every ancestor who made it through a winter that should have killed them. That is not a small inheritance. That is the entire reason you exist. Which of these methods do you think would have been hardest to endure? The fermented meat, the bone shelters, or the long silence of near hibernation? Tell me in the comments below. If this pulled you in, there is a lot more buried history waiting for you on this channel. I will see you in the next deep dive into our past. Stay curious. Stay evolved.